No complaints there. By the way, Dartmouth won't kill Kennedy. Well, not really. I saw this ad on the rats out there. Just came out. Somebody else has decided they never really did it. You can tell from this picture that their point of view is that Oswald was not the shooter, or that somebody else was the shooter. Because Oswald never had this vantage point through his rifle. So yeah, I can tell you what was in every frame of the Zapruder film by number, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Cool. Stand by here. Yeah, it doesn't want
That's
to be.
fine.
Try.
At least we got projection.
Yeah. So we'll start. We'll be good. Great. So just Dan already said who we are. I'm Dan Mishkin. That's Jersey Drozd. Absent is Ernie Cologne because he lives in New York. But the three of us together, we put together this book, the Warren Commission Report, a graphic investigation into the Kennedy assassination, which is maybe a longer title than you would like, but at least it gets the point across. This is something else that Ernie did, which you may know about. This is the 9/11 Reporter graphic adaptation. It came out in 2006, in time for the 5th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. It was a big success, and I thought it was a wonderful idea and tremendously well executed, and kind of my inspiration for coming up with the idea of doing the Warren Report when I realized the 50th anniversary of the attacks, of the report was coming out in the assassination.
Was it the only inspiration, though?
It was not the only inspiration, the other inspiration, thank you. This is a kind of representation of my family in 1963, November 1963. What I didn't realize when I started this, because obviously I think, oh, Ernie did that book, I could do this book, it could be fun, Ernie's my friend, somebody will pay me, all of that good stuff. But as I worked on it, what really became just totally clear was that this book was born in a compulsion to understand what was really a pretty devastating event in my life. I was 10 years old, and I was in the middle of reading a book about JFK's experience in the Navy as a PT boat skipper, and he was a hero, seemed like a hero, and then he was gone. And it was never entirely clear to me what that was about. I think it has not been clear to the country really what that's about.
So it's serious material.
Yeah.
So why on earth would you choose comics as a medium when
this is what comics are, right? Well, yeah, that's the question. Why are we doing comics to tell the story? Comics, after all, they're just silliness. They're fun and goofy and Goofy and Mickey and Doc. Right.
That's pretty serious right there.
Yeah, well, it is. But most of you probably know that that's not the only thing that comics are.
Right.
And you might know some of these books, all nonfiction, all either history or biography or memoir, or in the case of the climate change book, a real about the science and the understanding and the moment where we are in history. In our stewardship of the planet, which is really important. And then I'm sure you all know Maus, right? So Maus is in many ways the granddaddy of nonfiction comics. And Maus also helps us understand why nonfiction comics are worth even talking about or even doing. There's many great things about Maus, but I think that what's most important, and the reason we're looking at this page, is that comics have this tremendous ability to focus your attention in ways that you might not have been able to do on your own, you might not have thought of ever doing on your own. In this case, turning the Germans, the Poles, and the Jews into different types of quote-unquote funny animal really refocuses our understanding of what the Holocaust is, what is going on here. It uses this well-known routine of funny comics to place new attention in a new frame on a very serious historical experience and, of course, on Art Spiegelman's own life and family history.
So this is a good thing that comics allow us to simplify ideas down so that people can understand them better, right?
Well, yeah, right. Jersey asked me a leading question because simplification. Because complex topics don't have to become simplified in order to work in comics. When Ernie did the 9/11 reporting, and I called Ernie one time while he was working on this, didn't know he was working on it, and he told me about it, and I was like, holy cow, what a great idea. And he said, you know, he was reading the actual 9/11 report, and it was hard to keep everything straight. It was dense, there was a lot of facts, a lot of material, and as an artist, a comic book artist, he knew that visuals, graphics, could make all of that a lot clearer. And he said that best during a radio interview that I listened to, where an interviewer said, well, Mr. Colon, aren't you really oversimplifying a very complicated subject? And Ernie said, when we do comics, we're not in the business of simplifying, we're in the business of clarifying. And the distinction between simplifying and clarifying is huge, because you end up with memorable images that sort of remind you where you are, remind you what's going on, focus your attention on what you need to know. The 9/11 report book also included timelines and graph kind of graphics that really make this all much more understandable without simplifying.
So I remember when you sold the book, you sold the project to Abrams, and you called me. This was before my involvement, and I remember thinking like, oh, weird. Why would you want to do an adaptation of the Warren Commission report? 'Cause that's what we wanted to do, right? An adaptation.
Well, right. So that's I think our publisher, Abrams Comic Arts, was very interested in doing something like what Ernie did, not only the 9/11 report, but in some of his later work. The 9/11 book was clearly an adaptation, but it was clear to us from the start that adapting would not work when it comes to the Warren report. For one reason, if the 9/11 report is dense, at least it's trying to be clear. The Warren report is literally trying to beat you over the head with so many words that you submit and you say, okay already, here's this page has some examples of what does it say here? William Beard, operator of the presidential limousine, estimated the car speed at the time of the first shot at 12 to 15 miles per hour. Other witnesses in the Watergate estimated the speed of the president's limousine from 7 to 22 miles an hour. Who cares? I could say that in one sentence shorter than either of those and get the important information across, but they didn't want to do that.
And then there were other problems of the time as well, were there not?
You mean?
Well, in terms of like the changing of the time. So it was the 60s, so what? We got like attitudes are changing.
Right. So there's also, ultimately, we do have to talk about what's going on in the surrounding era. And one of the things that's going on is people are arguing right away with the conclusions of the Warren report. It's not like, yes, there are 9/11 truthers, but they're very, very small percentage. The people who don't believe the Warren report is still up over 50% today. And at the time, you have people coming out with books that say, hey, here's all the problems with this report. And yes, there have been books that have answered these questions. There have been people who have argued about it publicly. But there's not a final version that everybody agrees on. One of the things I write about in the afterwork of the book is the fact that when I was doing my research, if I came like on a website, onto a website that used the word obviously in describing what they thought about the Kennedy assassination, I knew that I could skip that website. Because if this were obvious, we would already have just settled it and agreed, but we have not.
But it's not obvious.
Yeah.
And you point out there's the complexity of the times, there's the density and almost like misdirecting density of text.
Deliberately
How-
obfuscated.
How do you set the goals? How do you set the goals for the book then? How do you sift through all that material and come up with what we're trying to do with this thing?
Right, so the question is, well, if you're not going to do a straight adaptation, you're going to do what we ended up calling an investigation. What what is that going to be? What do we want people to know? Well, part of that is based on what I was saying about my own, the 10-year-old still in me who still wants answers. Well, what are those answers? What are the questions that I want answers to? If you say, very likely we're not going to get 100% obviously clear, we know for sure what all the answers are, then what things can we answer? Well, we can answer what are the disputes? What issues of fact really are still in dispute at this time? And then how was the investigation into all those facts, all the evidence, how was that conducted? And why do those facts in dispute, why do those disagreements continue? Why haven't they been resolved? Why have they gone on for 50 years now? Basic points that you find huge disagreements on. Why does that disagreement persist? And then, as Jerzy was saying, what was the culture and the politics of the era that produced not only the assassination but the report? I think that we really try to show that what was going politically, culturally, socially, it not only was an era when a president might have been killed, taken pot shots at, but also an era that the nature of the times had a lot to do with how the Warren Commission conducted its business. And finally then, so what is the influence of the Warren Report on the 50 years that have followed? What, if the Times produced the Warren Report, what did the Warren Report do to influence the times that were going to follow?
And one of the things that was strange for me to adjust to was the fact that you would think that you're going to start at the beginning. One day, President Kennedy came to Dallas, Texas. Then this happened, and that's not the way the book goes. It's not a linear.
No, it's not this straight linear narrative, and I think shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And anyway, comics give you this wonderful opportunity to avoid, and then, because comics, again, because the pictures fix ideas in your mind, they fix locations, they fix moments in your mind, they allow you to iterate and reiterate, come back as you will, as you need to, go in with depth from what perspective you need to do. So we can tell the story or moments in the story in different ways, from different points of view, in a different level of detail. And we kind of do start, actually these are story pages 2 and 3 that you're seeing here. So the one page before it. So we do start at the moment of the assassination, but it's probably not accurate to say that 12:30 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963 is the beginning of the story. It doesn't come out of nothing. But in these opening pages, then we try to tell almost a story that's hard to follow. I have actually, since we committed to this, I've sometimes wondered if that was the right approach to take. But the first couple of pages are fairly chaotic. And by the time you get to the third page, you have an attempt to impose order on this terrible event. Johnson's first public words about wanting the nation's help, that he will do the best that he can, and then the decision to form a commission that again will try to impose an official order on everybody's understanding. But that decision is something that has to be examined and explored in depth. But first, we start with chaos and try to move to order, and then
we back up.
Then we back up and then try to tell something, in overview, something like the larger narrative. Beginning, again, not at the birth of John F. Kennedy or wherever you might choose to do it, or his election or anything like that, but starting 50 minutes before the assassination, when he arrives in Dallas at Love Field, and where we try to then tell a little bit about what's going on in Dallas, talk about the opposition to Kennedy, the reasons why he's coming here, the political reasons why he's come to Texas, and some famous lines. You don't see the end of this line, but the wife of Texas Governor John Connally, Nellie Connally, turns to the president after seeing this wonderful reception, and they're about to, this is seconds before the assassination. She says, "Well, Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." and it's kind of chilly, but we have that stuff. This is kind of the end of our overview,
Yeah.
but it's also, I think, a really crucial. You were talking about this too, about how we do multiple narratives.
This was the moment when I got excited about working on the book. So I got brought in a little later in the game. It was already under production, and as I was reading the script, I remember calling you and saying, "Congratulations, Dan! You just did something with comics that I don't think I've ever seen before." So what we have here is we have a narrative that's told after the fact. So obviously it's after that. It took place in 1963. It's about a report that was filed a year after 1963, yet we're chronicling the events as if they're happening in real time. So the events in November 1963, present time, a year later from the Warren reports, the testimony within the Warren report, and the statements by the commissioners themselves, and from the perspective of 2014. So you have three narrative voices that Dan knit together into this style where the narrator talks, the Warren Commission report describes much of what comes next in minute detail, and then these yellow caption boxes appear with italicized text, and this is the commissioners talking. And yet, we have real-time dialogue that you didn't make up.
No, this is, I put the testimony of these, this is Mrs. Kennedy, Governor Connolly, Mrs. Connolly. They described for the commission what their reaction was to hearing the shot, and I turned that, since I know nobody reports that they spoke these words to each other, then I thought it was okay, fair, to put their descriptions and testimony into present tense word balloons. Jackie Kennedy thinks it sounded like a motorcycle, backfire. Governor Connolly was sure right from the moment that was a rifle shot, and Nellie Connolly really didn't know what it was just a big noise. So, it was fine to give them their kind of present tense thought balloons. I love thought balloons, by the way. We'll go into that discussion.
That's a whole other thing. But this is where it gets weird, right? It's like, so here's Agent Hill jumping on the back of the presidential limo, the famous scene that we've all seen where he's trying to help Mrs. Kennedy. And then he's speaking his testimony he gave to the Warren Commission after the fact.
So in the winter or spring of 1964, Agent Clint Hill describes his experience in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963 to the Warren Commission. And the decision we made was that to avoid having caption after caption after caption, which really kind of takes you out of a comic book narrative, in my opinion, word balloons really ought to be thought of as a visual element on the page. They're part of the visual narration. And my prejudice is that word balloons integrate with the art just a lot more efficiently, a lot more naturally. So if we give people these past tense word balloons that come from the future and put them into the present action, then you'll always feel like you're in a story. So these are what people reported that they said at the time. It looks like the same kind of word balloon, but it's in the past tense. And we hope that the reader gets the sense that, okay, this person is not saying it to Mrs. Kennedy, obviously.
Right. I have heard from nobody about
Yeah.
confusion on this point. And that's the interesting thing. And I know I don't have to sell anybody here on comics. We all love comics. But if you saw that in a movie where Agent Hill's climbing on back and he's speaking his testimony as he's helping Mrs. Kennedy, it would look weird, it would look stylized, and it would be like, oh, this must be like an art film. But in a comic, we just take it for granted. We just like bridge those things.
In comics, all realities kind of can exist side by side.
Yep.
You know, I talk about how when you're watching a movie, no matter how great the effects are, you always know their effects. So you're saying, I wonder how they did this. Some little part of your mind. You don't have to ask that. You just know that somebody drew it, and that's all you need to know. This is all drawn stuff. So yeah, so we have present tense narration by the author's voice. Then we have the narrative dialogue, and we have the reflective dialogue of later testimony, and not only testimony. We'll talk about some other.
And talk about clarification. Okay, so you did something really smart. Congratulations. Let's talk about something Ernie did that was way smart.
Okay.
Which was.
Oh no, you tell that part about this page, which was really great.
So yeah, so like Ernie always surprised us and always delighted us by making choices that upon first blush we're like, well, that's a cool design. Then upon looking at it a little closer, we're like, oh, look what he did there. So here we have motorcycle police.
M.L. Baker.
M.L. Baker.
Yeah.
Here's the shots, and we'll talk about the shot in a second. And he goes running into the building, and then on the rest of the page, and just keep watching for this stuff because Ernie keeps doing this to us. we never see his face again. We see his face when he hears the shot, but then suddenly we're behind him like a third-person shooter game
Right.
where you are the character. He puts us in Baker's
Yeah.
POV.
Yeah. I don't think Ernie would ever call it a first-person shooter game. That's a great analogy to what he's doing.
Well,
Yeah,
for the kids.
if you're going to have a perspective, it's nice to identify what the perspective is, and we know we are getting, and here of course we're reading Baker's testimony, so let's experience it as he experienced it. And of course this is then going back to 12:30. We've already covered it in the overview, but here we are back again. 12:30 p.m. Dealey Plaza says the narration caption. And one thing that we have is a sound effect that is going to be there every time we come back to 12:30, Friday, November 22nd, 1963, Dealey Plaza. You're going to see that cow sound effect. Because really, what a quick, easy way of placing the reader where they need to be when you're telling a story that's going to go back and forth and iterate all these times. So that works, and the Warren Commission report tells us whose perspective we're following, and then we go and we get to use that detail, which, well, again, with comics, it just all comes together
Yeah.
very nicely.
So then we got to the scene where you turned it completely on yourself, right? You said like, all right, now everybody, let's hear about me.
No, that's not
And-
my story. No, so this is in fact my recollection of hearing about the assassination, but it's not meant to be me as me. Like, this is not one of those memoirs. This is not Mouse. This is not March. It's not any of those. I'm there because I can be representative of a few important things about the times, and this is really about the times. I am a 10-year-old baby boomer living in the suburbs, enjoying the fruits of post-war American economic prosperity. I should say that I'm a 10-year-old white baby boomer, because that makes a difference too. And I'm living that, a big part of what that post-war period and what the 60s were all about. So it's my experience. We had a parent-teacher conference day, so we were off from school. So I was home playing Frisbee with my best friend, and my brother walked out of the house. And here's another place where the narrative has to be played around with, and our editor was a little concerned about switching around, because here, this is 10-year-old Danny talking, but it's actually the voice of 60-year-old writer talking, and this is just the book's narration. So the stuff that's happening in 1963 ends up being in these sepia-toned balloons, so that when my little brother calls me, he's sort of calling me out of the past. And I can say, or the author, or whatever you want to say, can say that it was the American dream in the American century, and it seemed like it might never end. My brother calls my name, and I go, "What?" And when I go, "What?" I am stepping away from author Mishkin to 10-year-old Mishkin.
And again, this is one of those neat things where you might think of comics being at a disadvantage because we don't have movement or sound, but we've got color. And so we can use color in ways that sound just couldn't do it,
Yeah.
right? Unless you had like a little boy actor lip syncing to your voice, which would be creepy and weird.
It would be creepy and weird. Comics are great. You always have to know how to use the tools at your disposal. That's like the most important thing.
Yeah.
Storytelling. But this whole section really is about the times. And what we get to bring in to the times are the voices. So here's an important thing that we thought had to be said about 1963. All the changes that came after November 22nd, they were coming. They were not caused by Kennedy's assassination. They were not caused by the Warren Report. Because a year or 2 years earlier, Tom Hayden and the members of SDS in Ann Arbor were writing the Port Huron Statement. Betty Friedan was writing The Feminine Mystique. James Baldwin was writing The Fire Next Time. And what do we call them? Signs of discontent, signs of awakening, signs of warning, signs of revolution that many welcome and some want whatever to hasten. And ending the page with Bob Dylan, who less than a month before the assassination is in a recording studio recording The Times They Are Changing. And if you remember, well, the title enough tells you, but if you remember any of the lyrics from that song, you know, that your old world is rapidly aging, get out of the new one if you can't lend a hand, because the times they are changing. Lines that I couldn't use in the book when I found out how much it cost to license Bob Dylan lyrics.
So, okay, so the times are changing no matter what. You got the personal experience, but you know, JFK, seen the movie, conspiracy, bunch of wicked people working behind the scenes, right? Bunch of people who mean us all ill will. It must have been.
So that's the question. That, you know, here's the thing about the Kennedy assassination is we, as I said before, there's stuff we're never going to know. There are always going to be gaps. So let's fill in the gaps. It's easy to fill in the gaps. Not always going to be easy to fill in the gaps correctly. So yes, you can say, this really looks like a conspiracy. There are many good reasons to say this looks like a conspiracy. And we're going to give those people their voice, and we're going to give the official version its voice. That's I think the other narrative, besides the one we've talked about, is the narrative of those who challenge the official story. But here, we're not actually giving them, we're taking real dialogue. This from a real telephone conversation between LBJ, the new president, and J. Edgar Hoover, the longtime FBI director. And we're using this to talk about the political culture, the political moment in which these decisions were made and how the investigation was going to proceed. So whether you're going to conclude that they were malicious, evil, covering up, we're going to give you that opportunity. We're going to try to be faithful and objective reporters as best we can.
Yep. And another cute little comics moment where, and this is one of the things that we were borrowing from as we were learning Ernie's visual storytelling style. That was another challenge in the book, which we can go into when we're doing the signing part if anybody's interested. But Ernie likes to do a lot of this collage kind of thing where like physical elements from the story become panels themselves. And so then the memo shows up here, and then Dan came up with this clever way to integrate it where, what does it say in the memo? It says...
Yeah, so the memo says, I called the Attorney General at his home, and I told him I think we have the man who killed the president. That's what the memo says.
Right.
What we do is take the second half of that sentence and complete it as a word balloon.
And
so here I was
saying
mistaken before. This is from, this is not a conversation between LBJ and Hoover. Here's Hoover talking to Bobby Kennedy, the late president's brother, and the Attorney General. So here you can move from this sort of piece of evidence, this known thing, and then turn it again into word balloons. And in this case, so not verbatim dialogue, but turning into dialogue exactly what he said in the memo was what he said to Bobby Kennedy.
And let's be fair, he probably dictated that memo, so he probably did say those things.
Who knows? Yeah.
All right, so one of the things that surprised me in working on the book is I learned a lot about this event and the politics and details surrounding it through working on it. Was I didn't realize there was so much dispute over where the shots came from.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I thought like the text. I knew about Grassy Knoll Texas School Book Depository, but there was a lot more to that, even beyond that.
Yeah. No, there's a whole lot. I mean, people. That's the sort of the basic thing, but people. Some people are sure that shots could have come from the Dallas Textiles building, the Dow Tex building. People have a lot of different ideas, and it's important, again, to give voice to those who have this range of differing opinions. Here, the official account. Now, this again, the yellow balloons are the same as the yellow captions, quotations from the Warren report, but here we have the Warren commissioners delivering those lines, just mix up.
And then you go to eyewitness testimony, which is the most reliable source in the entire world, right?
Yeah, except when it's completely at odds. Every single one of these, not every single one. There's so many discrepancies among these people who gave faithful testimony, one assumes, about what they experienced, what they heard, what they thought they saw. But there's the person who saw Jackie Kennedy holding her little dog in her lap. Well, there was no little dog. She might have seen the rose bouquet, or she might have just, who knows what she saw. But people saw and heard a lot of things that can't all add up.
Which we explored with the, what was the 49, 50, 50, 51 spreads?
So I think that, yeah, so it's two double-page spreads that,
I'll
why don't you
show them both
them? Yeah,
first.
show them both, yeah.
There's one, or the second one, and there's the first one.
So as you can see, they're very similar, right? The basic structure of the layout is similar. These panels across the center tier are the same, and the ones at the bottom are essentially the same in that they are silent depictions of people reacting to either there's something there, I heard a shot from the Texas School Book Depository, or I heard or saw something from that stockade fence on top of the grassy knoll. Same with the panels on top are a little bit different from each other, more different from each other than the others are. But they're doing the same thing. Here's testimony from the Warren Report. High school student James Worrell. He heard a shot, he looked up, he saw the end of a rifle sticking out. Newsmen who thought they saw it. Workers at the book depository from the floor directly below where the so-called sniper's nest was found, and what they heard. On the next page, or pages, we have the railroad workers and one cop who are standing on top of the famous triple underpass or railroad overpass, depending on where you're standing, who believe that they saw smoke that might have come from a rifle that has just been fired, and ran over there, found footprints behind the fence. When you look at these two double-page spreads, I think what you see, and what comics really help us see, is that you only need a slight difference of perception to have a huge difference in your understanding of the event. One of the things I think is really important for us to do is to trust the honest intentions of people's testimony. Yes, we're going to talk about whether some people were lying and whether there was conspiracy. But you learn so much by seeing that people who are speaking in good faith are so much at odds and diverge so greatly based on only slight differences in perception.
And just a real quick point, there's two things I love about this center tier. For the reasons Dan suggested, but also because it kind of suggests that this is the empirical truth. This is the only thing we can take for granted. Yes, this went down, the motorcade went this way. Yes, Kennedy waved. Yes, there were shots. Yes, people were horrified. Yes, that car went. That much we know. Here's all the stuff surrounding it that we don't know. And I like it because I only had to draw those middle tiers once. Double duty always makes me happy.
That's right.
And this is something that didn't make me happy in terms of working. The Zapruder films, the famous footage of the assassination shot by Abraham Zapruder, it got used a lot in the story. And when I was drawing
it fell to Jersey to find a way of replicating those
yes.
exact frames. That
so I said, well, gee, Photoshop, we could just put the frames in there, right? I mean, they are evidence. We'll just drop them into the panels. And unfortunately, as Dan pointed out earlier, comics has its own reality because everything is reduced to lines, therefore nothing is real, therefore everything is real. They had to be drawings. It didn't look right when we dropped it, dropped in the frame. So it fell onto me to replicate those frames, and if you zoom in really close on them, you can see that they're just paintings. I couldn't draw them. When I tried drawing them with lines, they became too focused. They came into focus, and that's part of the point of these.
And of course, with these show then, by being somewhat more impressionistic, is just how poor the quality of an 8mm 1963 home movie film is going to be. But what's almost the tragedy of the Zapruder film is that it seems like it should give you a lot of answers, because it's a real image of what was really there. And the tragedy is that it raises at least as many questions as it answers, because it's too grainy, and because particular moments, like when you get to the question of whether JFK and Connolly were hit by a single bullet, Connolly doesn't react for a fairly long time till after he would have been hit. So what does that mean? Is a blotch of black that suddenly appears in one frame the blowing out of his lapel when the bullet is passing through right after Kennedy is hit? We just don't know. And by the way, if we're talking about when Kennedy is first hit, That happens when there's a road sign blocking Zapruder's point of view. Which you could make that a conspiracy theory too, if you want. He deliberately put himself because somebody was going to know that they were supposed to shoot at that instant.
Wait until you can see that the car is between me and that sign to fire
That's
the
right.
shot.
Yes.
Okay.
This is a period of 1 second, and you have a waving Happy Kennedy to Kennedy obviously responding to being hit. For those who care, probably not clutching his throat, which is how it was initially described, but probably a neurological reaction to nerves being damaged. It's referred to medically as the Thorburn position, where just the arms involuntarily jerk up.
Well, speaking of, oh no, we're going to get to medical evidence in a minute. But,
Yeah.
But first, we've got.
Well, what we've got here is an example of our commitment to faithfully reporting what different people say about conflicting narratives. So here is Lee Harvey Oswald shooting from the sniper's nest in the 6th floor, Texas School Book Depository, southeast window. Here is a guy, as yet unnamed, right, shooting from over the stockade fence at the top of the grassy knoll. Some people say that's what happened. Some people say that the Zapruder film proves that that's what happened. The big issue being Kennedy, the horrible headshot. Very briefly, his head jerks forward and then thrusts backward, which people read as, well, they had the perfect place to make a head go back like that is shooting from the grassy knoll. There are arguments about why that's a misreading of the physics and the neurobiology, but it's a perfectly fair reading, at least first reading of what's going on. So it has to be shown. And then you have those photographs again, not only the Zapruder film, but there's all sorts of arguments about the famous photo of Oswald in his backyard, whether that was doctored, all of that. There's also what people see in some of these grainy photographs. Blow this photo up and imagine that outline of a figure, and you suddenly got a cop who is shooting from the grassy knoll. You've got the guy who's known as the badge man. Here's the muzzle blast. Here's his cop's badge. Clear as day, right? Well, some people it's clear as day. You can. Then, you know what's interesting about this is this is a little inside baseball, but as an example of seeing things that aren't there. So Ernie laid out this page, and I looked at his version of the Oswald photograph, and he had very quickly sketched in the scalloped-edged, photographic piece. And I looked at it, and I said, "Oh, that's very cool. It's like he's a pop-up from the photograph." To which Ernie said, "No, I was just sort of sketching in the edges of the picture." But he says, "That's a really good idea. Let's do that." So I saw something that wasn't there, and it turned out to be a nice little narrative trick. But it's great that it's in this panel because it's this wonderful example of seeing things that aren't there in drawings and photographs or whatever.
Yeah.
So we go into more detail then, continue the areas of controversy. We go into the medical evidence. Again, lots of testimony about what the doctors in the emergency room saw and did. Also, what turned out to be a really nice human moment where Jackie Kennedy leaves the emergency room briefly, and Lady Bird Johnson is wandering. And this now is not reported, this is not testimony, this is Lady Bird Johnson. It was either an oral history or a diary from Lady Bird Johnson. And she describes running into Jackie Kennedy in the hall. So once again, she is talking in the past tense, except when we have the separate balloon for the things she said, right? And it's just a lovely way of integrating all of that.
So then we get into. Am I supposed to there? There.
Which
Medical evidence, using exhibits
Right.
as part of the narrative.
yeah, no, that first one that you had was right. We have two from the autopsy, just to show again the different perspectives. This is clearly, we're using the yellow caption, so this is clearly the Warren Commission's point of view that we're telling you. We're again using testimony and saying what's going on, and then the author narration is giving you a sense of who's who and what they're doing there, and using exhibits from which are not part of the Warren Commission record. These are actually from the later record. There are no autopsy photos that have been made public, no x-rays that have been made public. They are under seal until the year 2028, at least so far 75 years after 2038.
Oh, wow.
Right, 70, I can't count anymore. Yeah, 2038. This is from the House Committee in the 70s, and these are actually, you'll see these pictures online as autopsy photos. Interestingly, they are professional drawings made by an artist working on behalf of the Senate Select Committee on Assassinations from the autopsy photos. So the only autopsy photos you see are drawings of the autopsy photos. So we did drawings of the drawings of the autopsy photos. A lot of people will tell you that they are showing you things, if you go online to research this, that they're not actually showing you.
Well, and this is where I gotta doff my cap one more time to Dan. It's like, ultimately, it gets harder and harder to tell who did what when you work on a comics. It's so collaborative. But one of the things that I can report that I will always remember is Dan did the lion's share of the research on this book, and in the script gave links to all of the appropriate images for reference for these things, except for one scene where
That's a little later on.
Yeah, but he didn't give me specific. He said like just show us a spread of X-rays and some.
Oh, that is the next one. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah.
No,
Go ahead, right there.
That's fine. We'll go back and forth.
And so then I made the mistake of going to Google and typing the words very innocently because I was under deadline and I wasn't thinking straight, and I said JFK autopsy. And boy, the things you'll see.
Oh,
so once again, thank you for doing running interference.
And I mean, the other thing about that is that it takes a lot of time to do that research, and the artists are always going to be more under the gun on time. As it turned out, I think this is the only comic book I've ever written where I spent more time than the artist did. But
I believe it.
that's crazy. If you've ever done comics, it's insane. But it was mostly looking for images.
Yeah.
So one of the things we do is we do use actual exhibits from the Warren Commission report. And here you have Dr. Fink, who is describing, again, here's his testimony, and here's the related exhibit. He's describing what you will find when a bullet passes through a skull, basically. What will be concave, what will be convex, what will tell you whether it's an entry point or an exit point. So we use his exhibit there, the drawing that he brought. And here we use another exhibit, but as opposed to the previous one, that shows you something that supports the Warren Commission's conclusions. This is one that raises questions brought by the challengers. The location of the bullet hole from the non-fatal wound seems way low. Was it a dashed off sketch? Did it not take into account the position he was actually sitting in the car? Well, we'll get to those too. But here it is, for those who are prepared to see conspiracy, to those who have important questions, because I don't mean by prepared to see conspiracy, I don't mean you're just a nut. There's all these unresolved questions. This is glaring, and it needs an explanation. So we use the actual exhibits also to show why people raise questions.
And then wrapping up that section, you got the conflicting points of view, you got the politics, and then we have to get to the big man himself. Right?
That's right. We finish the single bullet theory, and we talk about why people argue both ways, and sort of summarize that. Again, we have let's just think, a nice looking, wonderful coloring job. It's really interesting what you can do with unrealistic coloring in comics. You want to talk about that at all? Or?
Well, I mean, there are scenes coming up where we're talking about where I really thought about, modern art and also animation. Ralph Bakshi was an influence for me on the color choices that I made to emphasize how moments should feel. And when we were leading into Oswald, I just thought like a nice menacing red in an unreal. And again, we're bringing into relief this idea that we're still not sure what happened here. This thing feels like a fever dream at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
Now we're going to get into a really weird area when we start exploring Oswald. So that's really what was going on.
Right, and it's not important that the reader be able to articulate that. You're
Yeah.
not going to, no reader. I'm going to put the number of readers at 0 who are going to say, this makes me think I'm in a fever dream.
Right.
However, they may very well have that emotional response that they can't articulate.
Right.
And that's important. So we do finally go to Oswald, and you notice something about him right away, if you haven't noticed it already. He's not in color at all. He's black and white. So why is he in black and white? He's in black and white to save the colorist time. I'll admit that I didn't think of this until I was thinking of it.
That was parenthetically in the email, yes.
That was honestly, but you know, necessity is the mother of invention. So here we go. What do we know about Lee Harvey Oswald? Well, we have a lot of disagreements. We have a lot of opinions. We know very, very little. Can we understand this guy? Probably not. I have my opinions, but I have actually strong opinions about him. But I can't claim that they're the truth. He's a mystery by being in black and white. He remains a mystery. And by the way, if he's black and white here, maybe you think that somebody who tells you that they know Lee Harvey Oswald for sure, maybe they're coloring him in a little more than the facts should let them. So we're going to be, part of our whole being objective thing is actually this unrealistic, he's in black and white. And then we go on to his death, Oswald's death at the hands of nightclub owner, strip club owner. But they used to say nightclub owner, so that's what I always say now. But honestly, strip club owner, as his business card would indicate. Jack Ruby, a point, of course, that again raises issues of conspiracy. How did this guy get into the police station? Was he let in? He's a strip club owner with Chicago mob connections, whose brother was a dry cleaner in Detroit, just in case you wanted to know.
Local connection.
That's right. A friend of mine said, who was doing some research on Jack Ruby, said, I've heard that he was the dry cleaning king of Detroit. I don't know if that's the mob.
That was his mob name.
Yeah, yeah. So this is again, we have, you know, author's voice, word commission voice, what Jack Ruby is reported to have said when he was wrestled to the ground, and then we go on.
Yeah, and then we get to one of my favorite pages that I've ever worked on in my life, and it's a startlingly simple page when you look at it. Because usually I like to do a lot of like really fancy composition and playing with simultaneity of time. But Dan presented this in the script, and I texted him. I think it was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was thumbnailing this page, and I texted. I just thumbnailed a page that gave me goosebumps. And the reason why is we've all seen the footage of Jack Ruby jumping out and shooting Oswald. It takes a quarter of a second. Oswald's coming through the crowd, and Ruby just pops out and shoots him. And what we came up with is this idea of, well, let's explore Ruby's testimony to explain his motives for doing this thing. And in doing that, by placing the testimony over the moment before he shoots Oswald, we're slowing things down. We turn it into, I think the word you used, Dan, was like, it makes it inevitable. It's an inevitability that we can't escape. We know it's going to happen. And then by leaving out the actual shot moment, because we've all seen it, we're not leaving it out to protect the squeamish. It's that we know what happens next. And by just going to white and just telling what happened after that, it became even more haunting.
Right. So what this page becomes, being able to put all that dialogue on there for Ruby's description of his motives means you have to spend more time on the panel. We very deliberately had the instance that the panel is showing be very close together. So it's a very short amount of time, broken into 3 panels with a lot of words that make you take your time to go through it. So it has that slow motion, kind of a dream ballet kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then both, as Jersey's saying, both the that slow motion aspect of it with our knowledge of what's going to happen, and then our refusal to show what's going to happen, just leave you in this unresolved place. You're left with the inevitability. You want to stop it? I certainly do. I always want to stop these things from happening, even though I can't. you want to stop it and you can't, and you know you can't stop it even though you don't see where it's going because you know where it's going.
And I remember I was working on the background inks for this page, and I was drawing the actual setting where those characters were, and it just fell off, and I couldn't figure out why. And upon thinking about it a little bit harder, I was like, oh, we're really inside Jack Ruby's mind right now. This is the mind of a really messed up guy. If just after reading his testimony, this moment should have a feeling of madness. And so then that's when I thought of Ralph Bakshi. Anybody ever seen Ralph Bakshi's films? Yeah, Lord of the Rings. And he's got all this like trippy psychedelic stuff in there. So yeah, I just put this splatter in the background with all this red to indicate like madness, rage, and all that stuff, passion. But then all of the non-principal players, right? Oswald's got to be white because he's Oswald, but Ruby is in natural colors. But all the other non-principal players, I just put in this kind of sickly green to indicate like this is a moment of madness.
Right. Yeah, being able to knock out colors into one over, super color for one large area of people. It's a great technique to have available. So then, again, talking about the politics and the investigation, we spend some time talking about how the Warren Commission did its business. And 10 years after the release of their report, the transcripts of their executive sessions were made public. And so we have some insight now. And what we see is that their pronouncements, their certainty, I mean, they were really into certainty. They were, we know, you don't, listen to us. All of that certainty is contrasted with their incredible frustration dealing with the FBI especially. They were at the mercy. To their credit, they did much more investigation than they expected to do because they felt that they couldn't rely simply on the condensed conclusions that came from the FBI and the CIA.
And they did a lot of work, but they still overlooked something very important.
No, they did. I mean, I think that, we talked about Bob Dylan and all of that. They did not understand the times they were living in some very important ways. They were, some of them, born at the end of the 19th century. They were establishment people. They were government people. They had a mindset that did not really get not only 10-year-old me in 1963 or 11-year-old me in 1964, but let's say the Beatles, or certainly Earl Warren got the civil rights movement, okay? I mean, he wrote Brown versus Board of Education 10 years earlier. There's, you can't get away from that. But there was this failure to see the rising current of youth and change, and they were really blind to that in many ways, and they did not see addressing all of that as their role. They saw the investigative role. I really believe that they really attempted to find the truth. I accept one of the commissioners on that score, the one who's a former CIA director, Alan Dulles. But the rest, I think, honestly wanted to find the truth, and they wanted to deal with the very important political issue of putting this all to rest and moving the country forward. And what they missed, what they sadly, profoundly missed, was that this was not only a political event. This was pulling the rug out from a vast segment of the population that were standing on that rug, on Kennedy's shoulders, on whatever you want to call it. They were standing on a ground from which they thought they were going to move forward into a changed America. And that was suddenly gone. And it was gone for reasons that nobody made sense of, that the Warren Commission didn't think it was their place to make sense of, didn't realize they had to explain. If somebody had used the phrase in 1964, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, then maybe somebody would have thought that that's what this should be. But nobody had used that phrase before. So it was a huge missed opportunity.
And so the world is left in doubt, and what's also surprising in working on the book was that even Lyndon B. Johnson had his doubts that he didn't go public about until way later.
Right. Toward at the end of his presidency, and after his presidency, he He says, look, Johnson more than anyone was clear that he had, and we get into this obviously in more detail in the book, that he had to create a presidential commission to just tamp things down. That was the goal, putting an end to this. But he clearly had his own thoughts about that. The Warren Commission, did not know that the Kennedy administration had been trying to have Fidel Castro assassinated. Again, Alan Dulles did, one of the commissioners, but he didn't tell his fellow commissioners. Lyndon Johnson didn't know it. So it's perfectly understandable. And of course, there was the killing of Trujillo and others. Some of you may or may not. But what Johnson said to one reporter is, we've been operating a damned murder incorporated in the Caribbean, as if no wonder they wanted to combat our president. So that's what's going on here. And then, but all those doubts are not publicized at the time by either Johnson's or his aides or Bobby Kennedy's, who was riddled with doubt and probably guilt because he was intimately involved in the attempts on the decision and the operations of the attempts on Castro's life. So 50 years ago, this past Wednesday, the Warren Commission commissioners go to the White House and they deliver the book, hastily published. They thought they'd be finished in February. They finished it in September. They give the president the book. They all say, "Oh, how great it is! Yeah, really, we've got this done."
And Life magazine comes out, it's the Warren Report, how the commission pieced together the evidence.
That's right.
Well job. Well done, man.
You have the New York Times and Time Magazine saying all these great things about it. Within a year, instead of that Life magazine cover, you have a matter of reasonable doubt. You have all the questions bubbling up, all the unanswered questions, all the concerns about, not at this point in the public media, not about the commissioner's good faith, but about whether they really could be as certain and as absolute as they were. The book gets praised, the report gets praised, the praise doesn't last long. And that's our book. Right there. By the way, Jersey also did these great images from the Zapruder film for the cover of the book. And at one point, I had a frame. So this is like frame 190, and I think I had like 186.
Yeah.
And you called me and you said, "Can I already did 190, and that seems like it's really close. Can I just do that one instead of having to do another one for the cover?" And I said, "Well, okay."
Well, not that it matters now, but at the time, each one of those took 4 hours.
Oh, no, yeah, no.
So we were under deadline, and Dan's like, and I was like, please don't be persnickety on this point, man, because it's 4 hours of my life.
So that's fine. We'll just use that. That is just fine. And that's it. So that's our story. Thank you.